Book One of The Bomb, the 1945 Test of the First Atomic Bomb. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. The Bomb, the 1945 Test of the First Atomic Bomb by Various. Book One, Trinity Site, by the National Atomic Museum. The First Atomic Test. On Monday morning, July 16, 1945, the world was changed forever when the first atomic bomb was tested in an isolated area of the New Mexican desert. Conducted in the final month of World War II by the top-secret Manhattan Engineer District, this test was codenamed Trinity. The Trinity test took place on the Alamogordo bombing and gunnery range, about 230 miles south of the Manhattan Project's headquarters at Los Alamos, New Mexico. Today, this 3,200 square mile range, partly located in the desolate Jornada del Muerto Valley, is named the White Sands Missile Range and is actively used for non-nuclear weapons testing. Before the war, the range was mostly public and private grazing land that had always been sparsely populated. During the war, it was even more lonely and deserted because the ranchers had agreed to vacate their homes in January 1942. They left because the War Department wanted the land to use as an artillery and bombing practice area. In September 1944, a remote 18 by 24 square mile portion of the northeast corner of the bombing range was set aside for the Manhattan Project and the Trinity test by the military. The selection of this remote location in the Jornada del Muerto Valley for the Trinity test was from an initial list of 8 possible test sites. Besides the Jornada, 3 of the other 7 sites were also located in New Mexico: the Tularosa Basin near Alamogordo, the lava beds, now the El Malpais National Monument, south of Grants, and an area southwest of Cuba and north of Thoreau. Other possible sites not located in New Mexico were an Army training area north of Blythe, California, in the Mojave Desert, San Nicolas Island, one of the Channel Islands off the coast of Southern California, and on Padre Island, south of Corpus Christi, Texas, in the Gulf of Mexico. The last choice for the test was in the beautiful San Luis Valley of south-central Colorado, near today's Great Sand Dunes National Monument. Based on a number of criteria that included availability, distance from Los Alamos, good weather, few or no settlements, and that no Indian land would be used, the choices for the test site were narrowed down to 2 in the summer of 1944. First choice was the military training area in Southern California. The second choice was the Jornada del Muerto Valley in New Mexico. The final site selection was made in late August 1944 by Major General Leslie R. Groves, the military head of the Manhattan Project. When General Groves discovered that in order to use the California location, he would need the permission of its commander, General George Patton, Groves quickly decided on the second choice, the Jornada del Muerto. This was because General Groves did not want anything to do with the flamboyant Patton, who Groves had once described as the most disagreeable man I had ever met. Despite being second choice, the remote Jornada was a good location for the test because it provided isolation for secrecy and safety, was only 230 miles south of Los Alamos, and was already under military control. Plus, the Jornada enjoyed relatively good weather. The history of the Jornada is in itself quite fascinating, since it was given its name by the Spanish conquerors of New Mexico. The Jornada was a shortcut on the Camino Real, the King's Highway, that linked Old Mexico to Santa Fe, the capital of New Mexico. The Camino Real went north from Mexico City till it joined the Rio Grande near present-day El Paso, Texas. Then the trail followed the river valley further north to a point where the river curved to the west, and its valley narrowed and became impassable for the supply wagons. To avoid this obstacle, the wagons took the dubious detour north across the Jornada del Muerto, 60 miles of desert, very little water, and numerous hostile Apaches. Hence the name Jornada del Muerto, which is often translated as the Journey of Death or as the Route of the Dead Man. It is also interesting to note that in the late 16th century, the Spanish considered their province of New Mexico to include most of North America west of the Mississippi. The origin of the code name Trinity for the test site is also interesting, but the true source is unknown. One popular account attributes the name to J. Robert Oppenheimer, the scientific head of the Manhattan Project. According to this version, the well-read Oppenheimer based the name Trinity on the 14th Holy Sonnet by John Donne, a 16th century English poet and sermon writer. The sonnet started, "Batter my heart, three-personed God." Another version of the name's origin comes from University of New Mexico historian Ferenc M. Saz. In his 1984 book, The Day the Sun Rose Twice, Saz quotes Robert W. Henderson, head of the engineering group in the explosives division of the Manhattan Project. Henderson told Saz that the name Trinity came from Major W.A. Lex Stevens. According to Henderson, he and Stevens were at the test site discussing the best way to haul Jumbo, the 30 miles from the closest railway siding to the test site. A devout Roman Catholic, Stevens observed that the railroad siding was called Pope's Siding. He then remarked that the Pope had special access to the Trinity, and that the scientists would need all the help they could get to move the 214-ton Jumbo to its proper spot. The Trinity test was originally set for July 4, 1945. However, final preparations for the test, which included the assembly of the bomb's plutonium core, did not begin in earnest until Thursday, July 12. The abandoned George McDonald Ranch House, located 2 miles south of the test site, served as the assembly point for the device's core. After assembly, the plutonium core was transported to Trinity Site to be inserted into the thing, or gadget, as the atomic device was called. But on the first attempt to insert the core, it stuck. After letting the temperature of the core and the gadget equalize, the core fit perfectly, to the great relief of all present. The completed device was raised to the top of a 100-foot steel tower on Saturday, July 14. During this process, workers piled up mattresses beneath the gadget to cushion a possible fall. When the bomb reached the top of the tower without mishap, installation of the explosive detonators began. The 100-foot tower, a surplus Forest Service fire watch tower, was designated Point Zero. Ground Zero was at the base of the tower. As a result of all the anxiety surrounding the possibility of a failure of the test, a verse by an unknown author circulated around Los Alamos. It read, "From this crude lab that spawned a dud, there next to Truman's axe uncurled, lo, the embattled savants stood, and fired the flop heard round the world." A betting pool was also started by scientists at Los Alamos on the possible yield of the Trinity test. Yields from 45,000 tons of TNT to 0 were selected by the various bettors. The Nobel Prize-winning 1938 physicist Enrico Fermi was willing to bet anyone that the test would wipe out all life on Earth, with special odds on the mere destruction of the entire state of New Mexico. Meanwhile, back at the test site, technicians installed seismographic and photographic equipment at varying distances from the tower. Other instruments were set up for recording radioactivity, temperature, air pressure, and similar data needed by the project scientists. According to Lansing Lamont in his 1965 book, Day of Trinity, life at Trinity could at times be very exciting. One afternoon, while scientists were busily setting up test instruments in the desert, the tail gunner of a low-flying B-29 bomber spotted some grazing antelope and opened up with his twin 50-caliber machine guns. A dozen scientists, under the plane and out of the gunner's line of vision, dropped their instruments and hugged the ground in terror as the bullets thudded about them. Later, a number of these scientists threatened to quit the project. Workers built 3 observation points, 5.68 miles (10,000 yards) north, south, and west of Ground Zero. Code-named Able, Baker, and Pittsburgh, these heavily built wooden bunkers were reinforced with concrete and covered with earth. The bunker designated Baker, or South 10,000, served as the control center for the test. This is where head scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer would be for the test. A fourth observation point was the test's base camp, the abandoned Dave McDonald Ranch, located about 10 miles southwest of Ground Zero. The primary observation point was on Campagna Hill, located about 20 miles to the northwest of Trinity, near today's Stallion Range Gate off New Mexico 380. The test was originally scheduled for 4 a.m. Monday, July 16, but was postponed to 5:30 due to a severe thunderstorm that would have increased the amount of radioactive fallout and have interfered with the test results. The rain finally stopped, and at 5:29:45 a.m. Mountain War Time, the device exploded successfully, and the atomic age was born. The nuclear blast created a flash of light brighter than a dozen suns. The light was seen over the entire state of New Mexico and in parts of Arizona, Texas, and Mexico. The resultant mushroom cloud rose to over 3,800 feet within minutes, and the heat of the explosion was 10,000 times hotter than the surface of the sun. At 10 miles away, this heat was described as like standing directly in front of a roaring fireplace. Every living thing within a mile of the tower was obliterated. The power of the bomb was estimated to be equal to 20,000 tons of TNT, or equivalent to the bomb load of 2,000 B-29 superfortresses. After witnessing the awesome blast, Oppenheimer quoted a line from a sacred Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita. He said, "I am become death, the shatterer of worlds." In Los Alamos, 230 miles to the north, a group of scientists' wives who had stayed up all night for the not-so-secret test saw the light and heard the distant sound. One wife, Jane Wilson, described it this way. "Then it came, the blinding light no one had ever seen. The trees illuminated, leaping out, the mountains flashing into life. Later, the long, slow rumble. Something had happened all right, for good or ill." General Grove's deputy commander, Brigadier General T.F. Farrell, described the explosion in great detail. "The effects could well be called unprecedented, magnificent, beautiful, stupendous, and terrifying. No man-made phenomenon of such tremendous power had ever occurred before. The lighting effects beggared description. The whole country was lighted by a searing light with the intensity many times that of the midday sun. It was golden, purple, violet, gray, and blue. It lighted every peak, crevasse, and ridge of the nearby mountain range with a clarity and beauty that cannot be described but must be seen to be imagined." Immediately after the test, a Sherman M4 tank, equipped with its own air supply and lined with 2 inches of lead, went out to explore the site. The lead lining added 12 tons to the tank's weight, but was necessary to protect its occupants from the radiation levels at Ground Zero. The tank's passengers found that the 100-foot steel tower had virtually disappeared, with only the metal and concrete stumps of its 4 legs remaining. Surrounding Ground Zero was a crater almost 2,400 feet across and about 10 feet deep in places. Desert sand around the tower had been fused by the intense heat of the blast into a jade-colored glass. This atomic glass was given the name atomzite, but the name was later changed to trinitite. Due to the intense secrecy surrounding the test, no accurate information of what happened was released to the public until after the second atomic bomb had been dropped on Japan. However, many people in New Mexico were well aware that something extraordinary had happened the morning of July 16, 1945. The blinding flash of light, followed by the shock wave, had made a vivid impression on people who lived within a radius of 160 miles of Ground Zero. Windows were shattered 120 miles away in Silver City, and residents of Albuquerque saw the bright light of the explosion on the southern horizon and felt the tremor of the shock waves moments later. The true story of the Trinity test first became known to the public on August 6, 1945. This is when the world's second nuclear bomb, nicknamed Little Boy, exploded 1,850 feet over Hiroshima, Japan, destroying a large portion of the city and killing an estimated 70,000 to 130,000 of its inhabitants. 3 days later, on August 9, a third atomic bomb devastated the city of Nagasaki and killed approximately 45,000 more Japanese. The Nagasaki weapon was a plutonium bomb, similar to the Trinity device, and it was nicknamed Fat Man. On Tuesday, August 14, at 7 p.m. Eastern Wartime, President Truman made a brief formal announcement that Japan had finally surrendered and World War II was over after almost 6 years and 60 million deaths. On Sunday, September 9, 1945, Trinity Site was opened to the press for the first time. This was mainly to dispel rumors of lingering high radiation levels there, as well as in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Led by General Groves and Oppenheimer, this widely publicized visit made Trinity front-page news all over the country. Trinity Site was later encircled with more than a mile of chain-link fencing and posted with signs warning of radioactivity. In the early 1950s, most of the remaining trinitite in the crater was bulldozed into an underground concrete bunker near Trinity. Also at this time, the crater was backfilled with new soil. In 1963, the trinitite was removed from the bunker, packed into 55-gallon drums, and loaded into trucks belonging to the Atomic Energy Commission, the successor of the Manhattan Project. Trinity Site remained off-limits to military and civilian personnel of the range and closed to the public for many years, despite attempts immediately after the war to turn Trinity into a national monument. In 1953, about 700 people attended the first Trinity Site open house, sponsored by the Alamogordo Chamber of Commerce and the Missile Range. 2 years later, a small group from Tularosa, New Mexico, visited the site on the 10th anniversary of the explosion to conduct a religious service and pray for peace. Regular visits have been made annually in recent years on the first Saturday in October instead of the anniversary date of July 16 to avoid the desert heat. Later, Trinity Site was opened one additional day on the first Saturday in April. The site remains closed to the public except for these 2 days because it lies within the impact areas for missiles fired into the northern part of the range. In 1965, range officials erected a modest monument at Ground Zero. Built of black lava rock, this monument serves as a permanent marker for the site and as a reminder of the momentous event that occurred there. On the monument is a plain metal plaque with this simple inscription: Trinity Site, where the world's first nuclear device was exploded on July 16, 1945. During the annual tour in 1975, a second plaque was added below the first by the National Park Service, designating Trinity Site a National Historic Landmark. This plaque reads, "This site possesses national significance in commemorating the history of the USA." Jumbo. Lying next to the entrance of the chain-link fence that still surrounds Trinity Site are the rusty remains of Jumbo. Jumbo was the code name for the 214-ton thermos-shaped steel and concrete container designed to hold the precious plutonium core of the Trinity device in case of a nuclear misfire. Built by the Babcock and Wilcox Company of Barberton, Ohio, Jumbo was 28 feet long, 12 feet 8 inches in diameter, and with steel walls up to 16 inches thick. The idea of using some kind of container for the Trinity device was based on the fact that plutonium was extremely expensive and very difficult to produce. So much thought went into a way of containing the 15-pound plutonium core of the bomb in case the 5,300 pounds of conventional high explosive surrounding the core exploded without setting off a nuclear blast, and in the process scattering the costly plutonium, about $250 million worth, across the desert. After extensive research and testing of other potential containment ideas, the concept of Jumbo was decided on in the late summer 1944. However, by the spring of 1945, after Jumbo had already been built and transported, with great difficulty, to the Trinity site by the Atchley Corporation of Pittsburgh, it was decided not to explode the Trinity device inside of Jumbo after all. There were several reasons for this new decision. First, plutonium had become more relatively, available. Second, the project scientists decided that the Trinity device would probably work as planned. And last, the scientists realized that if Jumbo were used, it would adversely affect the test results and add 214 tons of highly radioactive material to the atmosphere. Not knowing what else to do with the massive $12 million Jumbo, it was decided to suspend it from a steel tower 800 yards from ground zero to see how it would withstand the Trinity test. Jumbo survived the approximately 20-kiloton Trinity blast undamaged, but its supporting 70-foot-tall steel tower was flattened. 2 years later, in an attempt to destroy the unused Jumbo before it and its $12 million cost came to the attention of a Congressional Investigating Committee, Manhattan Project Director General Groves ordered 2 junior officers from the Special Weapons Division at Sandia Army Base in Albuquerque to test Jumbo. The Army officers placed 8 500-pound conventional bombs in the bottom of Jumbo. Since the bombs were on the bottom of Jumbo and not the center, the correct position, the resultant explosion blew both ends off Jumbo. Unable to totally destroy Jumbo, the Army then buried it in the desert near Trinity site. It was not until the early 1970s that the impressive remains of Jumbo, still weighing over 180 tons, were moved to their present location. Schmidt-McDonald Ranch House. The Schmidt-McDonald Ranch House is located 2 miles south of Ground Zero. The property encompasses about 3 acres and consists of the main house and assorted outbuildings. The house, surrounded by a low stone wall, was built in 1913 by Franz Schmidt, a German immigrant and homesteader. In the 1920s, Schmidt sold the ranch to George McDonald and moved to Florida. The ranch house is a 1-story, 1,750-square-foot adobe (mud bricks) building. An ice house is located on the west side, along with an 9-foot, 4-inch deep underground cistern. A 14 by 18.5-foot stone addition, which included a modern bathroom, was added onto the north side in the 1930s. East of the house there is a large divided concrete water storage tank and a windmill. South of the windmill are the remains of a bunkhouse and a barn which also served as a garage. Further to the east are corrals and holding pens for livestock. The McDonalds vacated their ranch house and their thousands of acres of marginal rangeland in early 1942 when it became part of the Alamogordo bombing and gunnery range. The old house remained empty until Manhattan Project personnel arrived in 1945. Then a spacious room in the northeast corner of the house was selected by the project personnel for the assembly of the plutonium core of the Trinity device. Workmen installed workbenches, tables, and other equipment in this large room. To keep the desert dust and sand out, the room's windows and cracks were covered with plastic and sealed with tape. The core of the bomb consisted of 2 hemispheres of plutonium (plutonium-239) and an initiator. According to reports, while scientists assembled the initiator and the plutonium-239 hemispheres, jeeps were positioned outside with their engines running for a quick getaway if needed. Detection devices were used to monitor radiation levels in the room, and when fully assembled, the core was warm to the touch. The completed core was later transported the 2 miles to Ground Zero, inserted into the bomb assembly, and raised to the top of the tower. The Trinity explosion on Monday morning, July 16, did not significantly damage the McDonald house. Even though most of the windows were blown out and the chimney was blown over, the main structure survived intact. Years of rainwater dripping through holes in the metal roof did much more damage to the mud brick walls than the bomb did. The nearby barn did not fare as well. The Trinity test blew part of its roof off, and the roof has since totally collapsed. The ranch house stood empty and deteriorating for 37 years until 1982, when the U.S. Army stabilized it to prevent any further damage. The next year, the Department of Energy and the Army provided funds for the National Park Service to completely restore the house to the way it appeared in July 1945. When the work was completed, the house, with many photo displays on Trinity, was opened to the public for the first time in October 1984 during the semi-annual tour. The Schmidt-McDonald Ranch House is part of the Trinity National Historic Landmark. The National Atomic Museum, Kirtland Air Force Base, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Since its opening in 1969, the objective of the National Atomic Museum has been to provide a readily accessible repository of educational materials and information on the atomic age. In addition, the museum's goal is to preserve, interpret, and exhibit to the public memorabilia of this age. In late 1991, the museum was chartered by Congress as the United States' only official atomic museum. Prominently featured in the museum's high bay is the story of the Manhattan Engineer District, the unprecedented $2.2 billion scientific engineering project that was centered in New Mexico during World War II. The Manhattan Project, as it was more commonly called, developed, built, and tested the world's first atomic bomb in New Mexico. This display also includes casings similar to the only atomic bombs ever used in warfare. Dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, these two bombs helped bring World War II to an end in mid-August 1945. The story of the Manhattan Project's three secret cities, Hanford, Washington, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Oak Ridge, Tennessee, is also presented in this area. A portion of the museum, the Low Bay, is devoted to exhibits on the research, development, and use of various forms of nuclear energy. Historical and other traveling exhibits are also displayed in this area. Also found in the Low Bay is the museum's store, which is operated by the museum's foundation. Adjacent to the Low Bay is the theater. The featured film is David Wolper's classic 1963 production, 10 Seconds That Shook the World. This excellent film is a 53-minute documentary on the Manhattan Project. Other films relating to the history of the atomic age are available for viewing and check out from the library. Next to the theater is the Library Department of Energy Public Reading Room, containing government documents that are available to the public for in-library research. The library also has many nuclear-related books available for reference and checkout. Located around the outside of the museum are a number of large exhibits. These include the Boeing B-52B jet bomber that dropped the United States' last airburst H-bomb in 1962, and a 280 millimeter (11 inches) atomic cannon, once America's most powerful field artillery. Also found in this area is a Navy TA-7C, a modified A-7B, Corsair II fighter bomber, a veteran of the Vietnam War. Many other nuclear weapon systems, rockets, and missiles are found in this area. In front of the museum are a pair of Navy Terrier missiles. The Terrier was the Navy's first operational surface-to-air missile. To the south of the museum, next to the visitors' parking lot, is a Republic F-105D Thunder Chief fighter bomber. Further south is a World War II Boeing B-29 Superfortress. This plane is similar to the B-29's Enola Gay and Boxcar that dropped the atomic bombs on Japan. The National Atomic Museum is open 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. daily, except for New Year's Day, Easter, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. The museum is located at 20358 Wyoming Boulevard, Southeast, on Kirtland Air Force Base, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Guided tours for groups are available by calling 505-845-4636 in advance. Admission and tours are free, and cameras are always welcome. End of Book 1. Book 2 of The Bomb, the 1945 test of the first atomic bomb. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. The Bomb, the 1945 test of the first atomic bomb by Various. Book 2, Trinity Site, 1945-1995, a National Historic Landmark, White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico, by White Sands Missile Range Public Affairs Office. Radiation at Trinity Site. In deciding whether to visit Ground Zero at Trinity Site, the following information may prove helpful to you. Radiation levels in the fenced Ground Zero area are low. On an average, the levels are only 10 times greater than the region's natural background radiation. A 1-hour visit to the inner fenced area will result in a whole-body exposure of 1/2 to 1 milliröntgen. To put this in perspective, a U.S. adult receives an average exposure of 90 milliröntgens every year from natural and medical sources. For instance, the Department of Energy says we receive between 35 and 50 milliröntgens every year from the sun and from 20 to 35 milliröntgens every year from our food. Living in a brick house adds 50 milliröntgens of exposure every year compared to living in a frame house. Finally, flying coast to coast in a jet airliner gives an exposure of between 3 and 5 milliröntgens on each trip. Although radiation levels are low, some feel any extra exposure should be avoided. The decision is yours. It should be noted that small children and pregnant women are potentially more at risk than the rest of the population and are generally considered groups who should only receive exposure in conjunction with medical diagnosis and treatment. Again, the choice is yours. At Ground Zero, trinitite, the green glassy substance found in the area, is still radioactive and must not be picked up. Typical radiation exposures for Americans per the National Council on Radioactive Protection. An hour at Ground Zero equals 1/2 millirem. Cosmic rays from outer space equal 40 millirem at sea level per year. Radioactive minerals in rocks and soil, 55 millirems per year. Radioactivity from air, water, and food, anywhere from 20 to 400 millirems a year. About 22 millirems per chest X-ray, and 900 millirems for whole-mouth dental X-rays. Smoking 1 pack of cigarettes a day for 1 year equals 40 millirems. Miscellaneous, such as watch dials and smoke detectors, equal 2 millirems per year. How to get to Trinity Site. Trinity Site, where the world's first atomic bomb was exploded in 1945, is normally open to the public twice a year, on the first Saturday in April and October. Trinity is located on the northern end of the 3,200-square-mile White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico, between the towns of Carrizozo and Socorro, New Mexico. There are 2 ways of entering the restricted missile range on tour days. Visitors can enter through the range's Stallion Range Center, which is 5 miles south of Highway 380. The turnoff is 12 miles east of San Antonio, New Mexico, and 53 miles west of Carrizozo, New Mexico. The Stallion Gate will be open 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Visitors arriving at the gate between those hours will receive handouts and will be allowed to drive unescorted the 17 miles to Trinity Site. The road is paved and marked. The other way of entering the missile range is by traveling with a caravan sponsored by the Alamogordo, New Mexico Chamber of Commerce. The caravan forms at the Otero County Fairgrounds in Alamogordo and leaves at 8 a.m. Visitors entering this way will travel as an escorted group with military police to and from Trinity Site. The drive is 170 miles round trip. There are no service station facilities on the missile range. The caravan is scheduled to leave Trinity Site at 12:30 p.m. for the return to Alamogordo. The caravan may leave later if there is a large number of vehicles in the returning caravan. In 1995, an additional open house will be conducted on July 16, the 50th anniversary of the Trinity test. Visitors may enter the missile range through the Stallion Range Center Gate from 5 to 11 a.m. There will be no caravan leaving from Alamogordo, New Mexico for this event. The early hours will allow visitors to be on site at 5:29:45 a.m., the time the Trinity Site detonation occurred, and should help visitors avoid the 100+ degree afternoon temperatures common here in July. Included on the Trinity Site tour is Ground Zero, where the atomic bomb was placed on a 100-foot steel tower and exploded on July 16, 1945. A small monument now marks the spot. Visitors also see the McDonald Ranch House, where the world's first plutonium core for a bomb was assembled. The missile range provides historical photographs and a Fat Man bomb casing for display. There are no ceremonies or speakers. Portable toilet facilities are available on site. Hot dogs and sodas are sold at the parking lot. Cameras are allowed at Trinity Site, but their use is strictly prohibited anywhere else on White Sands Missile Range. For more information, contact the White Sands Missile Range Public Affairs Office at 505-678-1134 or 1700. Trinity Site National Historic Landmark. Trinity Site is where the first atomic bomb was tested at 5:29:45 a.m. Mountain War Time on July 16, 1945. The 19-kiloton explosion not only led to a quick end to the war in the Pacific, but also ushered the world into the atomic age. All life on Earth has been touched by the event which took place here. The 51,500-acre area was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1975. The landmark includes Base Camp, where the scientists and support group lived, Ground Zero, where the bomb was placed for the explosion, and the McDonald Ranch House, where the plutonium core to the bomb was assembled. On your visit to Trinity Site, you will be able to see Ground Zero and the McDonald Ranch House. In addition, on your drive into the Trinity Site area, you will pass one of the old instrumentation bunkers, which is beside the road just west of Ground Zero. The Manhattan Project. The story of Trinity Site begins with the formation of the Manhattan Project in June 1942. The project was given overall responsibility of designing and building an atomic bomb. At the time, it was a race to beat the Germans, who, according to intelligence reports, were building their own atomic bomb. Under the Manhattan Project, 3 large facilities were constructed. At Oak Ridge, Tennessee, huge gas diffusion and electromagnetic process plants were built to separate uranium-235 from its more common form, uranium-238. Hanford, Washington, became the home for nuclear reactors, which produced a new element called plutonium. Both uranium-235 and plutonium are fissionable and can be used to produce an atomic explosion. Los Alamos was established in northern New Mexico to design and build the bomb. At Los Alamos, many of the greatest scientific minds of the day labored over the theory and actual construction of the device. The group was led by Dr. J. Robert Oppenheimer, who is credited with being the driving force behind building a workable bomb by the end of the war. The theory. Los Alamos scientists devised 2 designs for an atomic bomb, one using the uranium and another using the plutonium. The uranium bomb was a simple design, and scientists were confident it would work without testing. The plutonium bomb worked by compressing the plutonium into a critical mass which sustains a chain reaction. The compression of the plutonium ball was to be accomplished by surrounding it with lens-shaped charges of conventional explosives. They were designed to all explode at the same instant. The force is directed inward, thus smashing the plutonium from all sides. In an atomic explosion, a chain reaction picks up speed as atoms split, releasing neutrons plus great amounts of energy. The escaping neutrons strike and split more atoms, thus releasing still more neutrons and energy. In a nuclear explosion, this all occurs in a millionth of a second, with billions of atoms being split. Project leaders decided a test of the plutonium bomb was essential before it could be used as a weapon of war. From a list of 8 sites in California, Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado, Trinity Site was chosen as the test site. The area already was controlled by the government because it was part of the Alamogordo bombing and gunnery range, which was established in 1942. The secluded Jornada del Muerto was perfect, as it provided isolation for secrecy and safety, but was still close to Los Alamos. Building a test site. In the fall of 1944, soldiers started arriving at Trinity Site to prepare for the test. Marvin Davis and his military police unit arrived from Los Alamos at the site on December 30, 1944. The unit set up security checkpoints around the area and had plans to use horses to ride patrol. According to Davis, the distances were too great and they resorted to jeeps and trucks for transportation. The horses were sometimes used for polo, however. Davis said that Captain Bush, base camp commander, somehow got the soldiers real polo equipment to play with, but they preferred brooms and a soccer ball. Other recreation at the site included volleyball and hunting. Davis said Captain Bush allowed the soldiers with experience to use the Army rifles to hunt deer and pronghorn. The meat was then cooked up in the mess hall. Leftovers went into soups, which Davis said were excellent. Of course, some of the soldiers were from cities and unfamiliar with being outdoors a lot. Davis said he went to relieve a guard at the Mockingbird Gap post, and the soldier told Davis he was surprised by the number of crawdads in the area, considering it was so dry. Davis gave the young man a quick lesson on scorpions and warned him not to touch. Throughout 1945, other personnel arrived at Trinity Site to help prepare for the test. Carl Rudder was inducted into the Army on January 26, 1945. He said he passed through 4 camps, took basic for 2 days, and arrived at Trinity Site on February 17. On arriving, he was put in charge of what he called the East Jesus and Socorro Light and Water Company. It was a one-man operation, himself. He was responsible for maintaining generators, wells, pumps, and doing the power line work. A friend of Rudder's, Loren Berg, had a similar experience. He was a fireman in civil life and ended up trained as a fireman for the Army. He worked as the station sergeant at Los Alamos before being sent to Trinity Site in April 1945. In a letter, Berg said, "I was sent down here to take over the fire prevention and fire department. Upon arrival, I found I was the fire department, period." As the soldiers at Trinity Site settled in, they became familiar with Socorro. They tried to use the water out of the ranch wells, but found it so alkaline they couldn't drink it. In fact, they used Navy saltwater soap for bathing. They hauled drinking water from the firehouse in Socorro. Gasoline and diesel was purchased from the Standard bulk plant in Socorro. According to Davis, they established a post office box, number 632, in Socorro, so getting their mail was more convenient. The trips into town also offered them the chance to get their hair cut in a real barber shop. If they didn't use the shop, Sergeant Greyshock used horse clippers to trim their hair. Jumbo. The bomb design to be used at Trinity Site actually involved 2 explosions. First, there would be a conventional explosion involving the TNT, and then a fraction of a second later, the nuclear explosion, if a chain reaction was maintained. The scientists were sure the TNT would explode, but were initially unsure of the plutonium. If the chain reaction failed to occur, the TNT would blow the very rare and dangerous plutonium all over the countryside. Because of this possibility, Jumbo was designed and built. Originally, it was 25 feet long, 10 feet in diameter, and weighed 214 tons. Scientists were planning to put the bomb in this huge steel jug because it could contain the TNT explosion if the chain reaction failed to materialize. This would prevent the plutonium from being lost. If the explosion occurred as planned, Jumbo would be vaporized. Jumbo was brought to Polk, New Mexico, by rail and unloaded. A specially built trailer with 64 wheels was used to move Jumbo the 25 miles to Trinity site. As confidence in the plutonium bomb design grew, it was decided not to use Jumbo. Instead, it was placed in a steel tower about 800 yards from ground zero. The blast destroyed the tower, but Jumbo survived intact. Today, Jumbo rests at the entrance to ground zero, so all can see it. The ends are missing because in 1946, the Army detonated 8 500-pound bombs inside it. Because Jumbo was standing on end, the bombs were stacked in the bottom, and the asymmetry of the explosion blew the ends off. To calibrate the instruments which would be measuring the atomic explosion and to practice a countdown, the Manhattan scientists ran a simulated blast on May 7. They stacked 100 tons of TNT onto a 20-foot wooden platform just southeast of ground zero. Louis Hempelmann inserted a small amount of radioactive material from Hanford into tubes running through the stack of crates. The scientists hoped to get a feel for how the radiation might spread in the real test by analyzing this test. The explosion destroyed the platform, leaving a small crater with trace amounts of radiation in it. Bomb assembly. On July 12, the 2 hemispheres of plutonium were carried to the George McDonald Ranch House, just 2 miles from ground zero. At the house, Brigadier General Thomas Farrell, deputy to Major General Leslie Groves, was asked to sign a receipt for the plutonium. Farrell later said, "I recall that I asked them if I was going to sign for it, shouldn't I take it and handle it? So I took this heavy ball in my hand, and I felt it growing warm. I got a certain sense of its hidden power. It wasn't a cold piece of metal, but it was really a piece of metal that seemed to be working inside. Then, maybe for the first time, I began to believe some of the fantastic tales the scientists had told about this nuclear power." At the McDonald Ranch House, the master bedroom had been turned into a clean room for the assembly of the bomb core. According to Robert Basher, a member of the assembly team, they tried to use only tools and materials from a special kit. Several of these kits existed, and some were already on their way to Tinian, the island in the Pacific, which was the base for the bombers. The idea was to test the procedures and tools at Trinity, as well as the bomb itself. At 1 minute past midnight on Friday, July 13, the explosive assembly left Los Alamos for Trinity site. Later in the morning, assembly of the plutonium core began. According to Raymer Schreiber, Robert Basher was the advisor, and Marshall Holloway and Philip Morrison had overall responsibility. Louis Lawton, Boyce McDaniel, and Cyril Smith were responsible for the mechanical assembly in the ranch house. Later, Holloway was responsible for the mechanical assembly at the tower. In the afternoon of the 13th, the core was taken to ground zero for insertion into the bomb mechanism. The bomb was assembled under the tower on July 13. The plutonium core was inserted into the device with some difficulty. On the first try, it stuck. After letting the temperatures of the plutonium and casing equalize, the core slid smoothly into place. Once the assembly was complete, many of the men took a welcome relief and went swimming in the water tank east of the McDonald Ranch House. The next morning, the entire bomb was raised to the top of the 100-foot steel tower and placed in a small shelter. A crew then attached all the detonators, and by 5 p.m. it was complete. The test. 3 observation points were established at 10,000 yards from ground zero. These were wooden shelters protected by concrete and earth. The south bunker served as the control center for the test. The automatic firing device was triggered from there as key men such as Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, head of Los Alamos, watched. None of the manned bunkers are left. Many scientists and support personnel, including General Leslie Groves, head of the Manhattan Project, watched the explosion from base camp, which was 10 miles southwest of Ground Zero. All the buildings at base camp were removed after the test. Most visiting VIPs watched from Campagna Hill, 20 miles northwest of Ground Zero. The test was scheduled for 4 a.m. July 16, but rain and lightning early that morning caused it to be postponed. The device could not be exploded under rainy conditions because rain and winds would increase the danger from radioactive fallout and interfere with observation of the test. At 4:45 a.m., the crucial weather report came through announcing calm to light winds with broken clouds for the following 2 hours. At 5:10 the countdown started, and at 5:29:45 the device exploded successfully. To most observers, the brilliance of the light from the explosion, watched through dark glasses, overshadowed the shock wave and sound that arrived later. Hans Bethe, one of the contributing scientists, wrote, "It looked like a giant magnesium flare which kept on for what seemed a whole minute, but was actually 1 or 2 seconds. The white ball grew, and after a few seconds became clouded with dust whipped up by the explosion from the ground, and rose and left behind a black trail of dust particles." Joe McKibben, another scientist, said, "We had a lot of floodlights on for taking movies of the control panel. When the bomb went off, the lights were drowned out by the big light coming in through the open door in the back." Others were impressed by the heat they immediately felt. Military policeman Davis said, "The heat was like opening up an oven door, even at 10 miles." Dr. Philip Morrison said, "Suddenly not only was there a bright light, but where we were, 10 miles away, there was the heat of the sun on our faces. Then, only minutes later, the real sun rose, and again you felt the same heat to the face from the sunrise. So we saw 2 sunrises." After the explosion. Although no information on the test was released until after the atomic bomb was used as a weapon against Japan, people in New Mexico knew something had happened. The shock wave broke windows 120 miles away and was felt by many at least 160 miles away. Army officials simply stated that a munition storage area had accidentally exploded at the Alamogordo bombing range. The explosion did not make much of a crater. Most eyewitnesses described the area as more of a small depression instead of a crater. The heat of the blast did melt the desert sand and turn it into a green, glassy substance. It was called trinitite and can still be seen in the area. At one time, trinitite completely covered the depression made by the explosion. Afterwards, the depression was filled and much of the trinitite was taken away by the Nuclear Energy Commission. To the west of the monument is a low structure which is protecting an original portion of the crater area. Trinitite is visible through openings in the roof. It's the Schmidt House. The George McDonald Ranch House sits within an 85-foot by 85-foot low stone wall. The house was built in 1913 by Franz Schmidt, a German immigrant, and an addition was constructed on the north side in the 1930s by the McDonalds. There is a display about the Schmidt family in the house during each open house. The ranch house is a one-story, 1,750-square-foot building. It is built of adobe, which was plastered and painted. An ice house is located on the west side, along with an underground cistern which stored rainwater running off the roof. At one time, the north addition contained a toilet and bathtub which drained into a septic tank northwest of the house. There is a large divided water storage tank and a Chicago aeromotor windmill east of the house. The scientists and support people used the north tank as a swimming pool during the long hot summer of 1945. South of the windmill are the remains of a bunkhouse and a barn which was part garage. Further to the east are corrals and holding pens. The buildings and fixtures east of the house have been stabilized to prevent further deterioration. The ranch was abandoned in 1942 when the Alamogordo bombing and gunnery range took over the land to use in training World War II bombing crews. The house stood empty until the Manhattan Project support personnel arrived in early 1945. Inside the house, the northeast room, the master bedroom, was designated the assembly room. Work benches and tables were installed. To keep dust and sand out of instruments and tools, the windows were covered with plastic. Tape was used to fasten the edges of the plastic and to seal doors and cracks in the walls. The explosion, only 2 miles away, did not significantly damage the house. Most of the windows were blown out, but the main structure was intact. Years of rainwater dripping through holes in the roof did much more damage. The barn did not do as well. During the Trinity test, the roof was bowed inward and some of the roofing was blown away. The roof has since collapsed. The house stood empty and deteriorating until 1982, when the U.S. Army stabilized the house to prevent any further damage. Shortly after, the Department of Energy and U.S. Army provided the funds for the National Park Service to completely restore the house. The work was done in 1984. All efforts were directed at making the house appear as it did on July 12, 1945. Afterwards. The story of what happened at Trinity Site did not come to light until the second atomic bomb was exploded over Hiroshima, Japan, on August 6. President Truman made the announcement that day. 3 days later, August 9, the third atomic bomb devastated the city of Nagasaki, and on August 14, the Japanese surrendered. Trinity Site became part of what was then White Sands Proving Grounds. The Proving Ground was established on July 9, 1945, as a test facility to investigate the new rocket technology emerging from World War II. The land, including Trinity Site and the old Alamogordo bombing range, came under the control of the new rocket and missile testing facility. Interest in Trinity Site was immediate. In September 1945, press tours to the site started. One of the famous photos of Ground Zero shows Robert Oppenheimer and General Leslie Groves surrounded by a small group of reporters as they examine one of the footings to the 100-foot tower on which the bomb was placed. That picture was taken September 11. The exposed footing is still visible at Ground Zero. On September 15-17, George Crimmins, a young radio reporter from KRNT in Des Moines, visited the site with soundman Frank Liguori. They flew over the crater and interviewed Dr. Kenneth Bainbridge, Trinity Test Director, and Captain Howard Bush, Base Camp Commander. Back in Iowa, Crimmins created 4 15-minute reports on his visit, which aired September 24, 26, 27, and 29. A 15-minute composite was made and aired on the ABC radio network. For his work, Crimmins received a local Peabody Award for outstanding reporting and interpretation of the news. At first, Trinity Site was encircled with a fence, and radiation warning signs were posted. The site remained off-limits to military and civilian personnel of the Proving Ground and closed to the public. In 1952, the Atomic Energy Commission let a contract to clean up the site. Much of the trinitite was scraped up and buried. In September 1953, about 650 people attended the first Trinity Site open house. A few years later, a small group from Tularosa visited the site on an anniversary of the explosion to conduct a religious service and prayers for peace. Similar visits have been made annually in recent years on the first Saturday in October. In 1967, the inner oblong fence was added. In 1972, the corridor barbed wire fence, which connects the outer fence to the inner one, was completed. Jumbo was moved to the parking lot in 1979. Visits to the site are now made in April and October because it is generally so hot in July on the Jornada del Muerto. White Sands Missile Range. White Sands Missile Range was developed from a simple desert testing site for the V-2 into one of the most sophisticated test facilities in the world. The mission of White Sands Missile Range begins with a customer, a service developer, or another federal agency, which is ready to find out if engineers and scientists have built something which will perform according to job specifications. It ends when an exhaustive series of tests has been completed and a data report has been delivered to the customer. Between the beginning and the end of the test program, be it the Army Tactical Missile System or newly designed automobiles, range employees are involved in every operation connected with the customer and his product. The range can and does provide everything from rat traps to telephones, from equipment hoists and flight safety to microsecond timing. We shake, rattle, and roll the product, roast it, freeze it, subject it to nuclear radiation, dip it in salt water, and roll it in the mud. We test its paint, bend its frame, and find out what effect its propulsion material has on flora and fauna. In the end, if it's a missile, we fire it, record its performance, and bring back the pieces for post-mortem examination. All test material is reduced, and the customer receives a full report. For more information on Trinity Site or White Sands Missile Range, contact Public Affairs Office, STUS-PA, White Sands Missile Range, White Sands Missile Range, New Mexico, 88002-5047. End of Book 2. End of The Bomb, the 1945 Test of the First Atomic Bomb by Various.